My name's Adele Onyango and welcome to another episode of Legally Clueless. No, seriously, I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Hey you, welcome to episode 266 of Legally Clueless. This is what you can expect a little later in this episode.
So she gave me the keys. I waited for dark to come in. So I went around, I used a different door, went put my stuff in the boot or in the back seat, I can't remember. And I stayed with the kids because I knew when she's leaving, she'll have to look for me to get her car keys so she can leave. And when it was time for her to leave, I told her, today we're living together. And I think she just said something to insinuate, I think we've been over this, blah, blah, blah. In fact, let's have a sit down with your grandmother. I'm like, if you're going to have a sit down with my grandmother, that's cool. But as for me, myself, and I'm not sleeping under this roof tonight. I just went in the car and I locked myself. But I told her, if you insist that I stay here, I can promise you'll find me dead. And I think that's the first time I ever expressed suicidal thoughts.
That is Susan Grace's story, part one of it. And her story does reference sexual abuse and suicidal thoughts, which could be uncomfortable for some. It's coming up a little later in this episode. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome to the family. Audio episodes like this go out every single Monday, everywhere you find podcasts on. And if you go to our website, which is legallycluelessafrica.com, you can stream the podcast, you can watch our tour series, watch our video series, and sign up to officially join the family. So you can receive letters from me, which are pretty cool. Make sure you also join our Cozy Corner of the Internet, which is on Instagram. We're at Legally Clueless Africa. And if you want to share your story on this podcast, there's a storyteller form you need to fill out. A link to it is in the show notes, as well as all the other links that I've talked about. Another thing that's happening on our Instagram is we have just come back from our East Africa tour. We toured Ethiopia, we toured Rwanda, we toured Uganda. And let me tell you, I think this is some of our best work yet. Yes, I said it. And so we're going to be launching the season very soon. And I feel like we definitely should have a screening. So if you are interested in being invited to the screening, let us know on Instagram. We're still putting it all together alongside our partners and just trying to see, does it make sense? Let me tell you, a screening wasn't part of the plan. We were meant to go on our East Africa tour, come back home, go into post-production, which is hectic, and then just release the season. And when we were in Ethiopia, which was our last stop, it just hit me how powerful the work we were doing was, that I felt like, listen, this needs a screening. And it last minute. So I literally chatted our partners and I was just like, listen, I want to have a screening. I'm going to take the burden of doing this. Me being Legally Clueless Africa, we're going to lead on this, because I expected them to be like, how are you changing the game plan? Guess what? They were like, this is a good idea. Let's have a meeting about this. So we're putting it all together, but I really know in my heart that I want you there. So if you're interested in receiving an invite, just message us on Instagram. We're going to put everything together and ensure that once we settle on a date and all of those logistics, you definitely get an invite. Okay, I only have one thought to share before we jump into the story in today's episode, and it's about gratitude. I am moving from a space of love, yes, but also deep, immense gratitude. I feel like I've said this a couple of episodes before, but I want to share the illuminating thought around gratitude that has hit me. I am so grateful for the sacrifices the women who came before me took that allow me to have an abundance of choice right now. Every morning, if you've been listening to the podcast, part of my morning spiritual routine is to honor my ancestors. I have an ancestral altar. And I do honor the men in my lineage. I recently just added my dad to my ancestral altar, which shows growth in me navigating my father wound. But over the last couple of weeks, I have really been thinking about the women who came before me in my lineage, direct, and just thinking about the sacrifices that they went through, knowingly or not, that allow me to have an abundance of choice. And I kind of receive that gift and I hold it and cherish it so dear. An abundance of choice means I just have many choices. The choice to be financially independent, the choice to leave spaces that no longer serve me, the choice to live a life that is true to my dreams and ambitions, the choice to chase my ambitions, the choice to break free from society's definition of what a woman should be. So many choices I have that the women before me didn't have, but they sacrificed certain things so that my choices would have abundance. I have started approaching even challenges not by looking at how overwhelming the challenge is, but by looking at the abundance of options I have when I look at the solutions. And even when I don't have the solutions, because sometimes challenges be challenging and I have to sit for a while to await clarity, that moment of stillness is an option that I am grateful to have. Another space that I feel it, and this just happened last night, I'm currently shopping for a car. And I was complaining to my friend about how long it was taking, that this agent has done this car yard has done that. And I caught myself, and remembered how grateful I am for the ability to be looking for a car, abundance of choice. Even when it wasn't moving as efficiently as I want, having that choice is something I'm grateful for. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't feel the feelings of frustration or irritation or feelings that are associated with negativity. No, because I'm very aware that if you don't allow yourself to feel all your feelings, you do cause blockages, which is not something that I want. So I ensure that every feeling is felt, but gratitude is given more space. It's appointed the captain of the ship of emotions, and I always return to it. So I allow myself to feel and to process negative emotions, and then I let them go. But when it comes to gratitude, I feel it and I kind of linger in it. You know what I mean? I return to it so that it can fuel me. And specifically for being grateful for having an abundance of choice, it's something we really forget in the challenging times or even just in the mundane times. You have an abundance of choice. Never forget that. And that is a beautiful thing, even when it's tough decisions you're making, even when it's a challenging situation. The fact that when you look at your solutions or you look at your options of actions and they are abundant, that is something to be grateful for. I really hope this makes sense. I really do. I really do. But what does make sense is the story you're going to listen to in this episode. Susan Grace, she's a media personality here in Kenya, and her story is about her grandmother, her mother, and a mother wound. Do you remember this story references sexual abuse and suicidal thoughts, which could be uncomfortable for some people. 100 African stories on Legally Clueless. Stories from Africa.
My name is Susan Grace. I am a media personality. I have a background in journalism. That's actually what I pursued in uni. I started my media career in Kubamba Radio. This was back in 2017, 2018. After that, I went to Ibru TV. After that, I went to Kiss TV and then I didn't take a break, but life gave me a break. And then I now have the privilege of hosting a show on NTV, which is Crossover. It airs every Sunday from 11:30 all the way to 1 p.m. Apparently, according to my birth certificate, I was born in Nakuru, but I was raised in Kiambu by my shosho, by my grandmother, because as you're growing up, mnaambiwa mama yako ameenda kutafuta pesa, which translates to your mom is out there just, looking for money. And that is why, she's left you in the custody of somebody else. I think most people, when they hear that you're going to your grandma's, it's like an awe moment. But for me, it was not all, because it was very painful, very, I would say, traumatic as well. Because I always felt like my mom just dumped me there. And I mean, I get she had to come to Nairobi, try, get her ducks in a row, get her money in order. But at some point in my primary school, I would tell that she finally has her ducks in a row. And I felt like maybe it's time for you to not take me in. Because with my grandmother, she's very strict. There are strict parents, then there's my grandmother, okay? And there was a lot of physical beating, not the kawaida discipline, not the normal discipline, but there's just that extreme, discipline. And then there was also a little bit of verbal, okay, if I say abuse, it's so huge of a word, but there was that verbal, thing where she would constantly tell me that I'm a useless and hopeless child. And I think at some point, I think there was a slip of the tongue and she was like, oh, that's why your mom can't even handle you or can't deal with you. That's why she dumped you here, left you here, something in those lines. And it hurts you as a child, growing up, hearing all those things. And she's constantly telling you how useless and hopeless you are. And then when you look around, it kind of is adding up, because where's my mom? I must be super, super hopeless for my mom to not want to be with me. So all these things that are being spoken upon my life are kind of making sense, And so I just grew up feeling a bit horrible. Of course, I felt like there isn't a future for me. I didn't feel wanted. I didn't feel appreciated. I didn't feel like I belonged, And then on top of that, and then also my father has never been in the picture. I'll tell you that story as we continue because things have changed. So he's never been in the picture. So my mom is a bit distant. My pops is not in the picture. So the person whom I'm in the custody of is very rough with me, And as you grow up, you start to piece things together and two and two start to add up. And for me, I felt like my grandmother was a bit harsh on me because she was disappointed in my mom. I could be wrong, yeah? But my grandmother had a very good reputation. She was a very reputable lady in the village, in the society. She was a disciplinarian. And so I'm telling you, she was beating the life out of me. And so she was known for getting people's kids to be in line. And then her own daughter, who's a firstborn, ends up pregnant and unmarried. So I think that quote-unquote shame made her feel so bad, and her ego and reputation was bruised. And because now my mom has left me in her custody, Sasa, you see now it's all coming to me. All that anger she had, all that disappointed she had was being poured out to me, which was a bit unfair because, first of all, I didn't ask to be here. And second, I would have preferred if I was with my mom. And things got so ugly and unpleasant and I couldn't take it anymore. I remember there's a time my grandmother was beating me up so bad. My great-grandmother, now her mom, had to step in and tell her, you know what, just take the phone, call her mom, tell her to come and pick her daughter because you're going to kill her in this compound. So you can imagine the amount of beating you're receiving for someone to step in and say that your mom needs to be called to come and collect you because you're going to be unalived in the compound. It was terrible. And then I now got to a point where I would say I became a bit rebellious. I didn't care really. So I would sneak into my grandmother's handbag, I steal her phone, and I call my mom and I'm crying and I'm like, I need you to get me out of this place. I don't want to be here. And, it's always, oh, I'm going to talk to your grandmother. I'm going to talk to her. But now, if you talk to her, it means that I, quote unquote, reported her to you. So now I get in trouble for that. So this whole thing of me coming to you, asking for help, crying for help, and then you taking it to my grandmother, it comes back to me. And so, but I don't know, I was actually very persistent. I kept calling my mom. I'm like, you need to get me out of this place. And I think she assumed that I was trying to be overly dramatic because sometimes I'd even cry on phone and I'm like, Shushu is so mean towards me. She says bad things towards me. She beats me up so much. And let me tell you, at some point, there's a cousin of mine who came to stay with us. Sasa, he was a Bontao. Bontao means those kids who were born in the city. They don't know struggles. They have the coolest of things. So he came to stay with us. One thing I appreciate about my grandmother is that she really has no time for gender roles. For her, she's like, as long as you're living under my roof, you'll get things done. So she doesn't have that thing of this responsibility for girls, this one for boys. No, it's just, as long as you're capable, you'll do whatever she tells you to do. But now my cousin, he's a guy, he's just come from the city. He just wants to live life. He has a mountain bike. You remember the mountain bikes were a big deal back then. He has the soccer balls. They were a huge deal because back in the village, people used to custom make their footballs with paper and all that stuff and then tie it with rope, whatever. So he was always on the road playing like day in, day out. So whatever he was tasked to do, he ends up not doing it. guess who gets in trouble? Me, not him. Because now the argument would be, oh, you're a year older than him. I don't expect your reason and capacity to be the same as his. You need to use your common sense, Jerry. What's wrong with you? Then it goes back to, you're such a useless child. All those things, they just, at some point, I mean, she said it so many times that I would actually lip sync when she said in my head, I'm like, yeah, useless and hopeless child, So I got in trouble for so many things that I don't think I deserved, because for me, I would do my part, because again, I know what she's capable of, And I don't know, I think instantly, I mean, in a few instances, I tell my cousin, whatever Shosho tells you to do, Shosho is grandmother, whatever Shosho tells you to do, just do it. Before you go play with your peers, if it's dishes, just make sure you've done the dishes. If it's whatever, just make sure you've done before you go out there, because she's not cute when she's angry. But I guess it was just like, it's never that serious, So I don't know. I feel like I really didn't have a childhood. I don't even think I have childhood friends, because I feel like I was forced to become an adult at such an early stage. And I remember the few times I would try play around with kids, I got in trouble. And because now the kids knew how strict and ruthless my grandmother is, they were scared. They're like, we don't want to play with you, because if your shosho finds us playing, we're going to get in trouble as well. And let me tell you, my grandmother is the kind of person who, if she beat you up, you can't go tell your mom, because your mom knows you must have done something to warrant that beating. So there's always that fear of, we don't want to play with you because we don't want to get in trouble, blah, blah, blah. And so I guess at some point I just became lonely, and I think I matured very early. I honestly feel like I deserved a decent childhood. I deserved to just make my mistakes, to just not worry about anything, to go out there. As much as, yes, I've got things that I'm tasked to do, I wish there was that, leeway and that liberty to just be like, what, as long as you've done what you were supposed to do, you can go and play. But there are times I have done everything that I need to do. I've probably gone over and beyond. And then maybe I just want to, relax and play. But I'd get in trouble, and my shosho would tell me, listen, when you're done with chores, you get to the books. So for her, it was books, chores, and then Sunday church. There's no, any other businesses. But anyway, it was so rough. And so when I constantly called my mom, I was crying for help. She just, I guess she took it very lightly. And I got to a point when I became numb. And I'm like, you know what? I think it's me versus the world. It's me against the world, because I felt like nobody cared. At that point, I felt bad that I didn't know who my dad was. Because I was like, maybe if I called my dad, maybe he would come through, maybe he would listen to me more, or maybe he would care. But then I'm like, he didn't care enough to stick around in your life. So it just goes back to, yikes, I'm just alone. I'm just going to fight this by myself. But I finished my primary education. And so what would happen is my mom would visit like once in a blue moon. And I remember she used to visit on a Sunday afternoon. And on Sundays, I would be obsessed with her arrival, because I would go camp on the road, because I'm like, I'm waiting for my mom to come here, And the minute she gets here, I'm already talking to her about how, Mom, you need to get me out of this place. I don't like how Shosho talks to me, the names she calls me. I don't like how I get in trouble for my cousin's mistakes. And she's just, again, same thing. I'll talk to her. And of course, if she talks to her, I get in trouble. And it got to a point where I was no longer obsessed with her arrival. And so if I know she's coming this Sunday, I'm like, well, cool, whatever. And I would not wait for her by the roadside. I would not be excited if she arrives well and good. I'm probably doing something else. I'm probably locked up in my room, or I've just found something to do to keep me busy. And she'd come looking for me. She's like, oh, you didn't come to say hi and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, the excitement was not there anymore, But let me tell you, when I finished my primary education, I was just about done with my grandmother, And I remember when my mom came to visit, again, it was a Sunday, I asked for, so even before we get to this point, remember when I told you, at some point I started to figure that things are looking okay for her. She started to look, rich, and she looked capable of taking me in, right? Because she was traveling a lot. She was just looking moneyed, She was always giving me whatever I want, but whatever I wanted was to get out of that place, So this particular Sunday, she's come to my grandmother's, and I had premeditated my disappearance from that house. So I told her, of course, I wouldn't take the same approach and tell her I want to get out of this place. So I asked for her car keys. And, being a typical, like a kid, you just give your kids the key, because maybe it's something that fascinates us, right? So I took the keys. What she didn't know is that I had packed up my clothes. So she gave me the keys. I waited for dark to come in. I didn't want to move my stuff when it's still daytime. So I went around. I used a different door when put my stuff in the boot or in the back seat. I can't remember. And I stayed with the kids because I knew when she's leaving, she'll have to look for me to get her car keys so she can leave. And when it was time for her to leave, I told her, today we're living together. And I think she just said something to insinuate, oh, I think we've been over this, blah, blah, blah. In fact, let's have a sit down with your grandmother. I'm like, if you're going to have a sit down with my grandmother, that's cool. But as for me, myself, and I'm not sleeping under this roof tonight, you know? And I think she just tried to talk me into it. I just went in the car and I locked myself. But I told her, if you insist that I stay here, I can promise you'll find me dead. And I think that's the first time I ever expressed suicidal thoughts. I'm like, if you want to leave me here, that's fine. But me, I'm going to kill myself. And I just went into the car. And I don't know what they talked about. I don't know what they discussed. All I know is I finally left that place. So now comes a different chapter where I'm living with my mom. And I'm low-key regretting it because now remember, I feel like I forced issues with her. I shouldn't have forced issues with my own mom, you know? So here we are staying together, and then it's just me. I don't have siblings, yeah? So it got a bit awkward, and I think she felt like I was so much into her space, or she felt like, I don't know, in Kiswahili we say, nimekuja kumkazia. It's like I'm coming to restrict her lifestyle. It's like she no longer has that freedom to, I don't know, whatever. So I started to feel like a burden. I think I became scared of my mom because I felt like maybe she has so much hate towards me that if I cross her the wrong way, oof, the Kikuyu in me just came out. I was so scared that if I cross her, like even on the minute of things, she might just go off on me or just drag me back to my grandmother's. I don't know, I was living under fear. So I just developed this toxic habit of locking myself up in the room. So I would constantly be in my room. And then here I am. At the time I didn't know I was depressed, but I'm just like a young girl. I have so many thoughts in my head. I am feeling horrible. I'm feeling unwanted, unappreciated. I'm feeling like I was an oops child. And I don't know, I think with time it all compiled and it just made me feel so, I don't know if it's numb, but now as a way to unnumb myself, that's when I started cutting myself. And how I discovered it, I don't know what I was doing in my room, and then I pricked myself. And I was like, with a pin, I'm like, well, this kind of feels good. And so now it became a habit. I would prick myself. And then there are times I would deliberately prick my veins because I'm like, if I prick and then they start bleeding, I just might bleed to death. Because at this point, I was like, if I die, I felt like it would be better if I was out of my mom's way because I was feeling like a burden. I started pricking myself. It felt good. Now I started now with the same pin, like sort of scratching myself. It felt good. And before I know it, it had escalated to scalpels. And so I would cut myself. And I started with my legs because I knew I'd always wear trousers and she would never notice. And now it became a habit. And so I realized when I become numb, that's what I do to sort of feel normal, to sort of feel alive, to sort of, I don't know, it's just like to bring me back to reality, you know? And she didn't know about it for a while. And then fast forward to when she got into a relationship with some guy who, to be very honest, I was actually happy because I got a father figure. Well, so I thought. Because this man was very present in our lives. He was always home a lot. He introduced some oneness that my mom and I never had. Because with my mom, when she was downstairs, I'm upstairs. When she goes upstairs, I go downstairs. I don't know. I felt like if she saw me, she would feel some type of way. And I don't know. I feared that she would say something that I don't want to hear, or she might just hit me. I really don't know. I was just living under fear. And so when this guy came, we would have like even family sessions downstairs. He would ask me about my hobbies, about things I'm interested in. And I'm like, oh, this feels nice, you know? And I'm thinking to myself, this is how people feel when they have like a dad or like a father figure, right? And so we'd just hang out as a family, chit chat and all that. But now I think man's got too comfortable because now he started crossing the line. I remember this one time he was taking a nap upstairs. My mom had made lunch and she asked me to go wake him up to tell him that food is ready. So I went upstairs, I shook him, I'm like, food is ready. Please keep in mind, I'm not even 18. This is after primary school. Remember, that's when I forced issues to come to stay with my mom. And I was probably freshly into high school, if I'm not wrong, when all this was happening, yeah? So I go upstairs and I wake him up and I'm like, hey, mom says lunch is ready, let's go eat. And I'm about to leave the room. He calls me back and he tells me, the next time you're sent to wake me up, you have to wake me up with a kiss. Exactly my reaction. I'm like, there's no way, you know. Now keep in mind, I grew up with my grandmother. I didn't have a lot of exposure to all these things, at he kiss, at he what. It's not that I was a mshamba. Mshamba is someone who's, mshamba is what? Like how you define an uncivilized person. I was not uncivilized. I was just with a very strict grandma. But then all these things I'm not very exposed to these things, at he kiss me, you do what, you know. But of course I had the basic knowledge of you can't be seen with a man. You know those things that we're told, I should not see you with a boy. I don't be alone with like a male figure in a confined space, whatever. So when he's telling me the next time you're waking up, you're sent to wake me up, you have to wake me up with a kiss. I'm thinking, that is so wrong. It's not gonna happen. So I'm like, so I just say, okay. And I'm checking and he calls me back and he says, it starts today. I'm like, what starts today? Yeah. I'm like, what starts today? He's like, the wake-up kiss. I'm like, this is not happening, you know? And I'm not a child, but I'm a child, right? And I'm like, no, I can't do that, you know? And I just tell him, listen, lunch is ready. And I go back downstairs because at this point I'm scared. Because I'm like, okay, Sasa, what if my mom walks in and overhears this conversation? How do I even start to explain that? It was just an awkward moment. So I just went downstairs because I'm like, you know what, I did my part. I did wake him. If he wants to eat, he'll come downstairs. If not, you know, shauri yake, you know, that's his own problem, you know. And I didn't mention it to my mom at first until there's something he did and I can't remember. I guess most of my memories are suppressed. But now at that point, I went and I told my mom, your boyfriend, he's a bit indecent. He's crossing a few lines. And I thought at this moment, my mom would be like, what do you mean? You know, no man should be touching my daughter, right? Oh, she just goes off on me and she just tells me, oh, but you're the one who's always hanging out with him. I'm like, what do you mean? Because any time that I hang out with him, you're hanging out with him as well. I never, ever hang out with this man by himself. It's always the three of us. So I'm thinking, what do you mean I'm the one who's always hanging out with him, you know? And then a part of me is also excited because I feel like I have a father figure, so I get to chit-chat with him. I get to, somewhat experience what it feels like to have a dad or somebody, you know, who's, again, a father figure. And so maybe there are times we're in the sitting room chit-chatting when she's in the kitchen, but it's never at me and him. We're out there doing lunch, you know. So I felt so disappointed by that response. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm sorry I even came to disturb you. Now, keep in mind, this is the second time, if I'm not wrong, where I'm going to my mom asking for help because of something that is honestly beyond me. And she just dismisses it. And as you can imagine, this man, I guess he picked up on the fact that really no one is taking it seriously. So he just kept escalating things and escalating. I remember at some point he deliberately pissed off my mom. My mom, she's not quick to anger. She doesn't have anger. She didn't have, anger issues. But this guy would deliberately just touch every nerve he can touch just to get her to this point. And I remember she lost it and she picked a glass and she slammed it on the wall. And I'm like, woof. I've never seen my mom this angry. So the minute she did that, he comes in and says, oh, Sophie, you see now you're even angry. I don't even think it will be safe for your daughter to sleep in this house today. Let me go with her. I'll bring her tomorrow morning. Sasa, innocently, of course, I'm like, this doesn't sit right with me. But keep in mind, I really have some fear towards my mom. I feel like she doesn't like me. She doesn't want me. Any chance she gets maybe to get rid of me, she just might. I just felt unwanted by my mom. So this night, when I saw her losing her cool, slamming a glass on the wall, I'm like, you know what, maybe whatever this guy is saying is making sense. Because now I'm actually now more scared of what my mom would do. So as you can imagine, the guy got me, we left the house. And now later in life, as I was thinking about it, I'm like, wait. I think at that particular moment, despite how angry she was, I feel like my mom should have jumped in and said, listen, I don't care what you have to say, but you're not living with my daughter. You know, just something to step in. But yeah, he took me to his house. I'm not going to say the estate where he was staying. So he was staying there. It was a 3-bedroom, a very beautiful house. And I remember we first went to the kitchen because I wanted to see if there's something to eat. And we went upstairs and I asked him which of the 2 rooms, because now I figured the master is his bedroom, which one of the other 2 rooms was going to be my room. And Mans tells me, we are going to sleep together. We're going to sleep in the same bed. And obviously that didn't sit well with me. But now I have no choice because it was late in the night. And I remember he started unzipping my dress or unbuttoning. I can't remember what I was wearing. And I got very reluctant and I'm like, you can't do that. And he told me, if you let me touch you, I'll marry you because I love you so much. And something about that statement just didn't make sense because first of all, I'm not even 18. What are we talking about? Marrying me? Like, on what grounds are you marrying me? And then also I'm thinking, if you've not married my mom, like, I mean, that statement was just messed up. But he was like, if you allow me to touch you, I guess he said something to insinuate this is my way of showing love to you. So if you let me touch you, I'll marry you, what, a bunch of nonsense. And so at this point, I feel helpless because at the end of the day, he's an old man. He's super strong. I was so tiny. And it didn't matter whether I said no. He was determined to do it, and he just crossed a few lines. Just allow me to skip to now the part where I think now my mom pieced, and just put 2 and 2 together and she figured, oh, this man is actually not a good man. But by the time she was breaking up with him, kicking out his stuff, it was too late. I was already traumatized. I was already hurt. I felt so ashamed of myself. I felt so embarrassed. I felt so filthy. And I was just like, oh, well, and now this also added to my numbness because I'm like, I guess in this life, it's just me trying to survive it. Nobody really cares about me because even he showed that he cared about me. And I didn't realize that he only pretended to care because he had an end goal, and that really hurt me and that really bruised me. So by the time my mom was doing the needful, it was too late. I think I'd gone back to my tendencies of just locking myself up in the room, cutting myself some more. And I remember one time she came to my room and she told me, Jerry, you need to start. Like, you need to get out of the house. Like, you need to, take a walk around the estate. And I'm like, no, I'm good. And she'd insist because I think now she noticed, I think I'm not okay, And she insisted that, no, you have to get out, take a walk, fresh air, all that stuff. And sometimes I'd take the walks, but I'd end up regretting because now keep in mind, I'm a very tiny girl. Alafu ad parara, nilikuwa parara. Basically, I was not looking my best back then, There's something that depression does to you. I think it first and foremost just dehydrates your system. So you just look so worn out, even when you're so young. So I was super skinny. I'm not looking my best. And so when I'm taking walks around the estate, there are these cliques of guys, the school kids, yeah? And there are times they would shame me straight up in my face. They'd make fun of me because I'm a tiny girl. I'm so skinny. I'm not pretty. And they would laugh amongst themselves. And that would just make me feel so horrible. So the other times my mom would tell me, you need to take a walk. I'm like, because now I'm also traumatized because out here I'm not pretty enough. I'm not wantable, if that's even a word. So I'm like, you know what? I think I'm better off just in my house, Fast forward, I think there's a time where my mom vanished on me. I woke up one morning, she was not home, but I figured she went to work. And then night came, she was not home. And I just realized she just wanted a break, I guess, from me. I don't know. So at this time, I was at my very vulnerable moment because at some point, this is still in high school, at some point I developed a condition of nose bleeding a lot. So I'd just be sitting here, my nose starts to bleed. And I went to see an ENT and they had to fix up my veins up there. So I woke up this morning. So I wake up super drowsy because I've lost so much blood during the night because I'd also nose bleed at night. And so I was so confused because I'm like, where's my mom? Now I'm scared because my mom is not around. And I'm thinking she probably went to run an errand. She's coming back. And she didn't come back that night. I don't know how many nights she was away for. But I remember thinking, did something happen to her, Then I later learned that she just, vanished. And I'm thinking, she wanted a break from me. And then I'm like, I'm underage. Like, with whom are you leaving me with? And then the house was so big. So I'm also scared. And I remember I would sleep downstairs for, I don't know if there were 2 nights. And I remember this morning, I was sleeping on the couch. She woke me up. And she told me, this is after she had disappeared. She now resurfaced. She came back home and she woke me up and she told me, get up, we are moving. And I'm like, what? I think the pillow I was sleeping on was so bloody because, again, the nose splits. And I'm so confused. I'm like, what do you mean we're moving? And she's like, we're moving. And I'm like, oh, okay. But now the challenge is I was not going with her.
Catch more African stories in the next episode of Legally Clueless. That is part 1 of Susan Grace's story. Part 2 will be out next week. So make sure next Monday you're here, ready to hear it. And let me just tell you, I mean, this story really brought so many things to the forefront for me. The first is the hill that I choose to die on. And I acknowledge my privilege in saying this, as there's some situations where you do need help. But I really don't think your children should live with anyone but you if you can help it. Not with your friends, not with your relatives. There are a lot of unhealed people who shouldn't have access to your children. And these people could very well be your family. And it's just so unfortunate that her grandmother seemed to be taking out her unprocessed trauma and her disappointment in her mother on Susan. Here's the thing that I've realized about families. And when we talk about breaking cycles, there's also cycles of trauma and cycles of unhealed, unprocessed, unacknowledged traumas. And they have passed on across generations in families. And the reason they have passed on is that it's the family's norm. This is how things have always been. You know it's uncomfortable. You feel like it's probably unhealthy, but it's your normal. If you sit in chaos long enough, it becomes your normal. As much as you can tell it's damaging me, it's where you're most comfortable because it's all that you know. And I acknowledge that it takes a lot of courage and strength to break those cycles of trauma. It requires you to figure out how it's manifesting in you as an individual, be very clear and conscious about it, and then seek ways to change that. But what is an even harder thing to do, and I'm not sure it's even possible, is to heal that trauma for everyone in your family across different generations. Because some people have sat with it for very long. It's become their safety net. Some people don't even acknowledge that it exists. So when I come back to the hill that I choose to die on, which is, and again, I acknowledge my privilege in saying this, which is, I don't think your children should live with anyone but you. You could be handing your child over to someone who, yes, is a relative, yes, is your blood, yes, may practice routines similar to yours, but hasn't acknowledged, processed, or even begun healing certain traumas that they have. And it may be familial traumas passed across generations, or even traumas to do with your relationship as the parent with this person you're giving your child to. And you don't know how that will influence how they treat your child. It's the hill that I choose to die on, and I choose to die on it understanding that I do have privilege. I choose to die on this hill knowing that I'm not a parent, but on the outside looking in, it's just something that I'm like, I don't know. And then, it really came out in Susan Grace's story about mother wounds. They are real. And having a child is a decision you shouldn't take lightly. Oh my goodness. You stand to inflict so much harm on a child who is innocent, absolutely innocent beings, if you are not cognizant of how impactful everything you're going to do as a parent will be to this child. I don't even know what to say about that stepdad. My heart just broke. Like, I wanted to reach in. I don't want to get emotional. What's happening? I wanted to reach in and grab Susan Grace out of that story and just give her a hug and give her a safe place. Finally, it just felt like a series of unsafe spaces from the people who were meant to keep her safe. But what I was wowed by is Susan Grace's clarity. So many people failed her, and she is holding them accountable, which is important, and she's doing it with so much grace, just like her name. And so I feel a level of comfort in that, almost like her healing journey is empowering her. So this is part 1 of her story. Part 2 is out next week. If you want to connect with Susan Grace, we've put a link to her Instagram in the show notes. You can go and send some love her way. I think it's so powerful that she so graciously shared such a heavy part of her story with us. Speaking of stories, you want to share yours, make sure you fill out the storyteller form. A link to it is in the show notes. Fill it out. We have correspondence. We record stories all year round, and it doesn't matter where in the world you are. You're African, you have a story, we want to hear it, and we know it's valid. Make sure you sign up to officially join our family. So head over to our website, which is legallycluelessafrica.com, and fill out the form to start receiving letters from me. You will be receiving a letter this week that has some insider info from our tour that I just want to share with you, and that will never make it to the podcast or to the or to the tour series episodes. So sign up quick, fast. We've come to the end of this episode. I am sending you so much grace, and catch you next week. That's it for this episode of Legally Clueless. You can share this podcast with your friends. You can keep it for yourself. I'm not judging. Just make sure you're here next week for the next episode.